Let's talk a little bit about VPNs and what you're going to need to know for your exam. One of the things that we know is that if we have information that is going across an untrusted network, people will very likely be sniffing the network, and it's very likely that they will try to get in between with an intent to steal the information. So VPN, a virtual private network, allows us to get secure private connections through an untrusted network like the internet. And it allows the private connection because it gives us the encryption and the tunneling protocols that make sure that the confidentiality and the integrity of the data in transit is encrypted. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about a keyword when mentioning VPNs, and that keyword is a tunnel. And the tunnel between two nodes, like a remote user in this case, and a server or something on an internal network, allows us to send confidential information from a remote system to that network. There's a bunch of different reasons why. If we're communicating things like PII or maybe transferring data or money, and we want to make sure that it is encrypted when we do that. So because of that, a lot of times you hear people using what's called point-to-point tunneling protocol. Let me make sure I spell this correctly. Tunneling protocol. And the PPTP, say that 10 times in a row, is something that Microsoft really builds into most of their Windows products. And because of that, we need to secure any transmission that we're going through and being able to talk from that remote user or that remote node that allows us to communicate to that server with some sort of encryption mechanism. And so many times you'll hear people talk about this thing called the challenge Handshake Authentication protocol, or CHAP for short. And the CHAP really was made popular by Microsoft in that Microsoft essentially put their lipstick on it, and they made it to what is formally called now MS CHAP in any type of communications with a Microsoft server. And that allows for communications to be sent to a network access server or some sort of PPTP server that initiates the virtual private network, and usually will rely on some sort of challenge handshake through a token of some sort or a predefined keyword or passphrase that allows the system-to-system communications to happen between a remote user and some sort of secure server that's you're looking to get onto. Another technology that we typically will see with virtual private networks is what's called layer 2 tunneling protocol, or L2TP for short. And that's another VPN solution that takes some of the things that we just talked about, like PTP, point tunneling protocol, and adds another layer on top of that that typically is from Cisco's handbook, called the layer 2 forwarding, or L2F, and it gives you that layer 2 tunneling protocol that allows you to talk over just about every type of network that's out there. So, Microsoft typically is, in this particular case, this is typically IP to IP, whereas layer 2 tunneling protocol may give you an IP to some other communication, anything that is available either on an IP network or maybe an IPX network, or if you're using something like a WAN-based connection like an ATM or a frame relay. Those may be things that you communicate using the layer 2 tunneling protocol that allows us to have a secure transaction. And finally here, the thing that is one of the more popular things that typically you will hear from a discussion with the virtual private networks is this thing called Internet Protocol Security, or IPsec. And IPsec is typically what we hear people say is more of a bolt-on solution, where essentially we can take an existing infrastructure, stand up an IPsec server of some kind, you pay for it, and then the IPsec will allow us to go through and secure any type of communications between a remote node and a server that you're trying to communicate with. IPsec has a couple of different ways that it communicates, and it uses a few different protocols, but one of the things that you need to pay attention to is this thing that's called the authentication header, or the authentication header, as well as what's called the ESP, or the encapsulating security payload, which is essentially looking to encrypt. It also will use a couple other technologies that are familiar in the marketplace called Ipsec and the Internet Key Exchange. And so through the use of this IPsec VPN using authentication headers and the encapsulation security payload, a lot of times what we'll hear people talk about is this tunnel that is associated with in a way where you can either encapsulate just the payload, or you can tunnel or encapsulate the entire communications, which is from the authentication header and the payload, you create a tunnel in a way that is totally secure. Now, there may be different reasons why people may not want to encrypt everything, like performance, but typically people will encrypt everything using the IPsec because it uses multiple VPN connections at the same time. It allows secure authentication as well as encryption. It does IP networks, which is pretty much LAN to LAN, and usually it will give us the communications to work at the network layer of the OSI model and provide security on top of an insecure protocol in the IP when we talk about that.